And then you have the reporting agencies. Remember we talked about Claudia Sahm, the Sahm rule, which is I think 9 recessions in a row perfect record, where if employment rate drops, I think 50 basis points below its 3-month moving average, you're in a recession. And the unemployment rate would have had to have fallen to 4.5% for that to be triggered, as it should be. In September, we get this, again, with the BLS. I mean, we should just take the L right out of this and call it what it is. It's BS. They tell us after revising 1 million jobs in last year, now they tell us that in September, that they added a whopping 254,000 jobs, the biggest monthly increase since March, higher than average monthly gain, blah, 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 blah. But what they didn't tell us is that they actually increased the number of government workers by 785,000 government workers, the highest monthly surge in government workers on record. Right before an election, complete and total BS out of the BLS. In reality, the U.S. job market shed 458,000 jobs in September. They're called non-seasonally adjusted jobs. Okay, so those would be the kids who went back to college that were, doing landscape work and part-time work and whatever. We lost 460,000 jobs. We added 785,000 government jobs. And to your point, government doesn't produce anything. They just suck assets out of the system, suck profitability. They don't have the profit motive that we find in business, where you do things for a profit motive. There is no profit motive with government. Therefore, it's completely and totally inefficient. And that's exactly what we are seeing here, just this crap and people will believe it, because most of the people who think that the economy is strong didn't even see that they quietly revised jobs down at the end of the year for 2023. It's disgusting. We spent $66 billion on illegal immigrants in 2023 versus $4 billion for homeless veterans when you talk about priorities being misplaced. And it's crazy. So, I think that there are a lot of things going on right now that people should be alarmed about. How about this one from the too stupid to be stupid category? Former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte visited the Ukraine last week, Thursday, just 2 days after replacing the gal who was running the head of NATO. And now Rutte is now the head of NATO. And he says, Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before, and we will continue on its path until you become a member of our alliance, he said. I mean, when you talk about stupid, are they trying to drag us into World War III? Are they trying to provoke Putin? A promise that Ukraine would never be in NATO. And now you have NATO not only providing assistance, providing weapons, but now they're going as far as saying you're going to be dragged into NATO. This is crazy. So, I think it's time that people start to think unconventionally. These are very unconventional times.
The rule, which boasts an impressive track record of predicting recessions with near-perfect accuracy, says that when the unemployment rate drops by 50 basis points, 0.5%, below its 3-month moving average, you're staring at a recession. In fact, based on this metric, we should already be in a recession, as the unemployment rate should have fallen to 4.5% back in September. But what did we get instead? The Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, or as I like to call it, the BS, and we might as well drop the L at this point, reported that the U.S. added a whopping 254,000 jobs in September. And while that sounds all rosy, it's pure deception. Here's the real kicker: 785,000 of those were government jobs, the largest surge in government employment on record. Right before an election year, no less. Coincidence? I think not. Now, before anyone throws confetti at the BLS, let's talk about what these numbers really mean. Government jobs don't produce anything of real value. They don't contribute to GDP in the same way that private sector jobs do. They're essentially a drain on the system, sucking resources while offering little return. What we're seeing is an illusion of job growth. At the same time, the real U.S. job market shed 458,000 jobs in September. Non-seasonally adjusted jobs, mind you. These are your kids who went back to college, part-time workers wrapping up summer gigs. So when the government tells you that jobs are being added, What they're not telling you is that those jobs are largely inflated government positions that don't help the economy grow. Let's be clear, this isn't about improving the economy. It's about manipulating data to make it look like things are better than they are, especially as we roll into election season. And here's the thing. When the economy is truly in free fall, where are people going to turn? Gold and silver. We've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Gold and silver are not just commodities. They're hedges against a collapsing system. Historically, during periods of economic crisis, people have flocked to precious metals because they know that governments cannot print gold the way they print fiat currency. Let me bring this closer to home. In 2023 alone, the US government spent $66 billion on illegal immigration, compared to a measly $4 billion for homeless veterans. Think about that for a moment. Our government is not prioritizing the people who have served the country, and this reflects a broader trend of misallocated resources. The more the government spends, the more it has to borrow, which leads to an ever-expanding national debt that's already past the point of no return. You may have heard me talk about gold confiscation before, and some folks think I'm being alarmist. But here's a perspective to chew on. My father recently told me, "Andy, I don't think there'll be gold confiscation. They'll just make gold so expensive no one can afford to buy it." He might be right. We're heading toward a future where gold revaluation becomes the government's go-to tool for solving the debt crisis. They won't necessarily seize your gold. They'll just make it out of reach for the average person by driving its price through the roof. And once they revalue gold, they'll use that inflated price to pay down their gargantuan debt. Now you might be asking, but Andy, what does that mean for me? Simple. It means you need to get your hands on gold and silver while you still can. The more chaotic the world becomes, the stronger people's grip on their metals. And do you really think anyone who has gold will be willing to sell it back into dollars when the dollar's falling apart? Absolutely not. As Mark Twain famously said, buy land. They're not making it anymore. The same goes for gold and silver. Here's another piece of the puzzle that's often overlooked: the geopolitical landscape. Did you know that the new head of NATO, former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, recently visited Ukraine and promised that they are closer to joining NATO than ever before? This is a dangerous game, folks. Why? Because NATO expanding its borders to include Ukraine is a direct provocation to Russia. Remember, one of Putin's red lines was Ukraine joining NATO. Now, with NATO not only providing weapons, but also promising membership, it's as if they're begging for a conflict that could spiral into something much bigger. Why am I telling you this? Because geopolitical instability adds another layer of risk to the global economy, and in times of war or conflict, people turn to hard assets. No one wants to be caught holding dollars when missiles start flying. People want gold, silver, and other tangible assets that have intrinsic value and are accepted across borders.
When, again, and I'm not talking my book, I've said it forever, the biggest challenge in getting or in accumulating metal will be just getting it. It won't be about the price. Yeah, the price is going to go higher. It'll be about the availability or the lack thereof. And it's very important to underscore one very, tenet of the metals market. There is no bull market like a metals bull market, because the higher the price goes, or the crazier the world gets, or the combination of the two strengthens people's grip and resolve. Yeah, I was right. I knew it. And after all of these years of being ridiculed by friends and family for having these beliefs, and it's finally coming to fruition, do you really think that these people will sell for a profit and go back into dollars when the world has become the most scary? No. And so the secondary market just disappears. And there comes a point where it's every country for themselves, or every man for themselves. And these countries like Australia or South Africa or the UK or even Canada may look at selling product to the United States very differently than they once did, especially when gold and silver were, tertiary investments at best, second, third, or fourth in line, maybe even more after things like stocks, bonds, real estate, and other forms of insurance and whatnot. So things change. And I think we are getting to that point, this collective realization. And it's all going to be square in the face of the G7. And these are the countries that are selling gold to the United States, with the exception of South Africa, may look at doing just that very differently and be more nationalistic and take care of their own. So yeah, I think that this is exactly how it happens. I was talking with my dad the other day and said, yeah, I don't think there'll be gold confiscation. They'll just make gold so expensive that no one can afford to buy it. And this is the gold revaluation. They're going to revalue the price of gold. I believe that in my soul. And when you see the central banks of the world, who are the most well-informed traders on the planet, not only wickedly accumulated at a level that is increasing year over year, month over month, day over day, hiding how much they're really truly accumulating, and then speaking continuously of gold being held in the revaluation account and the prospect of indeed revaluing it, it will happen. I do believe that. And they will use it to reliquify the system, which will create massive inflation. But it is something that I think that they will do. It is a way of maybe option 3. Instead of defaulting, instead of outright hyperinflating in your face, they'll revalue gold, which will create massive inflation, but will enable them to pay off a large portion of the debt. I think that's what we are seeing. And I think you go back to 1974 after we were off the gold standard already. So they're calling it a reserve creating instrument. Gold is eternal. They understand this. The big money understands it. And he who has the gold and the commodities makes the rules. And all of the metal is heading eastward. So whether we beat them to the punch and kind of steal their thunder, which wouldn't surprise me, or they do it, I would say and I don't want to go out on a limb, but I will and say by this time next year, wouldn't surprise me one iota if we saw gold revalued to a level that would shock people. And it's an option that's staring them right in the face, and I think it's hard to ignore. So I'm not one for making predictions like this, but I think it's just too much is happening that is leading this way for it not to be understood that the narrative is being rewritten right in front of us on gold. And now with Russia coming out and saying silver too, and China buying up all the concentrate and the doré all around the world, gold and silver have never been more important. And I hope people are taking these weekly calls we have with a dose of seriousness, because I think this is it. I really do. Getting gold will not be as easy as it once was before this is all said and done, and the price will be much higher as a result of the world understanding that by revaluing it, much of their problems can be washed away.
Here's what you need to know. The next 12 months are going to be crucial. I believe that within a year, we could see gold revalued to a level that shocks the world. And if you're not holding gold when that happens, you'll be left behind. Look, I'm not in the business of making wild predictions for the sake of it, but the writing is on the wall. The central banks of the world, the most informed traders on the planet, are hoarding gold at record levels. They know what's coming, and they're preparing for it. Shouldn't you? Now, I'm going to get deeper into why gold and silver are not just valuable. They're essential for navigating the turbulent waters ahead. And yes, there's a storm brewing, economically, geopolitically, and socially. If you're paying attention, you can already feel the winds picking up. But before we dive in, let me start with a tweet I came across recently. Someone wrote, "The US debt is a bomb, and gold is the only bunker." Simple, right? But it captures the essence of what I'm about to break down for you. So let's talk about the debt bomb we're sitting on and why gold and silver are your only safe havens in this mess. You've heard it a million times. The US is drowning in debt. The national debt has surged past $36 trillion, and it's growing faster than anyone can keep track of. Every year, the government spends more than it brings in, and it borrows the difference. This isn't sustainable, and it's not just me saying it. Financial experts across the board, from Ray Dalio to Peter Schiff, have been sounding the alarm for years. It means that your savings, your retirement fund, and your purchasing power are at risk. Every time the government prints more money to cover its debts, the value of the dollars in your pocket decreases. This is called inflation, and it's not going away. In fact, the Federal Reserve keeps moving the goalposts, insisting that inflation is transitory, while quietly admitting that it's here to stay. Just take a look at housing prices, grocery bills, and energy costs. Everything is getting more expensive because your dollars are worth less. And this brings me back to the central point. Gold and silver are your protection against this kind of devaluation. Let's talk about gold revaluation for a second. There's a lot of speculation about whether the government will confiscate gold, like they did during the Great Depression. Personally, I don't think that's likely. Instead, I believe the government will revalue gold to a much higher price to help pay off its debt. Here's how it works. By revaluing gold, the government can essentially inflate away a large portion of its debt. Let's say gold gets revalued from its current price of around $1,900 per ounce to something like $10,000 per ounce. That would allow the government to use its gold reserves to cover a significant portion of the debt. This isn't just some far-fetched idea. Back in the 1970s, after the US went off the gold standard, there were calls to revalue gold to solve the economic problems of the time. And here we are, 50 years later, facing similar issues. Here's something you might not be hearing in the mainstream media. Gold is flowing eastward. Countries like China and Russia are hoarding gold at unprecedented levels. In fact, China has been buying up all the gold concentrate in door bars they can get their hands on, while Russia is openly talking about adding silver to its reserves. Why are they doing this? Because they see what's coming. They know that the US dollar is on borrowed time, and when it falls, gold will be the real currency. In a multipolar world, where power is no longer centered in the West, gold and silver will be the only currencies that matter. China and Russia aren't alone in this. Countries all over the world are reducing their holdings of US dollars and increasing their gold reserves. This is a global shift, and it's happening right under our noses. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a world where the US can no longer buy gold because other countries are hoarding it for themselves. That's where we're headed. When the dollar collapses, the countries with the most gold and silver will be the ones calling the shots. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the inevitable collapse of the US dollar. I know you've probably heard this before, and maybe it hasn't happened yet, but just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, but that status is under threat. Countries like China are working hard to create alternative systems that bypass the dollar altogether. For example, China's Belt and Road Initiative is helping them build trade relationships that don't rely on the dollar. Russia is doing the same. As more countries move away from the dollar, its value will continue to erode. And when the dollar collapses, what do you think is going to happen to your savings? Your 401k? Your retirement fund? I'll tell you what will happen. They'll lose value, fast. That's why it's so important to have a portion of your wealth in gold and silver. These precious metals have been used as currency for thousands of years, and they've never lost their value. In fact, during times of crisis, their value tends to skyrocket. Let me tell you something about bull markets. There's no bull market like a metals bull market. When people start realizing that the dollar's worthless, they'll flock to gold and silver. But here's the thing. By the time most people figure it out, it'll be too late. Gold and silver are in limited supply, and when the demand skyrockets, the price will go through the roof. But even more importantly, the availability will dry up. Think about it. When the world is falling apart, do you really think people who own gold and silver will want to sell? Absolutely not. The secondary market for precious metals will disappear, and the price will keep climbing as a result. This isn't just speculation. It's happened before, and it'll happen again. So here's the bottom line, folks. We are living in unprecedented times. The global economy is teetering on the edge, the US dollar is losing its status, and the world is waking up to the value of gold and silver. You have two choices. You can wait and hope that everything goes back to normal, or you can take action now and protect yourself with gold and silver. The choice is yours. But remember this, when the storm hits, the only ones who will be safe are those who prepared in advance. And the best way to prepare is to invest in real assets, the kind that have stood the test of time. So if you haven't already, now's the time to start accumulating gold and silver. Because when the dust settles, those who hold precious metals will be the ones standing tall. Stay safe, stay informed, and as always, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We're all in this together, and the more we know, the better we can navigate what's coming.